Keeping up high spirits, as well as the libertarian, liberating, and internationalist lineage that had characterized it throughout its history, Venezuela contributed with the release process in Cuba, sending its rebel army 7 tons of weapons and ammunition. On December 7, 1958, Acting President Wolfgang Larrazábal assigns Captain Abdelnour the mission of organizing the logistics to send a plane with supplies, medicine, food, and weapons to the Cuban revolutionaries who were fighting in the Sierra Maestra. This had great historic importance to the people of Venezuela, who ignored the contribution made by the administration of President Wolfgang Larrazábal Hugueto, the governing board, the armed forces, the late Colonel Hugo Trejo, and other military leaders like Captain Héctor Abdelnour and Navy Lieutenant Alberto. Even though the weapons arrived almost at the end of the armed struggle and almost a month before the revolution's triumph, they played a relevant role in the Battle of Mafo, preamble to the takeover of Santiago de Cuba. It was a very risky mission, and a lot of secret and emergency measures were taken to avoid betrayals and to prevent the dictator Batista from aborting the mission. We will go into the context of this event. At the time, Cuban politician Fulgencio Batista, who had been president on 2 occasions between 1940 to 1944 and 1952 to 1959, took military and political power and was head of a government with a dictatorial regime after the coup of March 10, 1952. He had inherited a relatively prosperous country for Latin America, although 1/3 of the population lived below the poverty line. Cuba was one of the most developed countries in this area at the time. Batista, who came from humble origins, enlisted in the army as a soldier. He worked his way up until he reached the rank of sergeant major, the highest ranked among those enlisted. During the 1950s decade, Batista's regime received financial, logistic, and military support from the United States. Although shortly before this time, Batista had led a military coup where he dissolved Congress, suspended the Constitution of 1940, and outlawed all political groups. Established in power, he managed to suppress the first communist attempt of 1953 by incarcerating Fidel Castro and his followers. In 1957, led by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, the revolutionaries relaunched their attacks, and on New Year's Eve in 1958, with the army and the population against him, Batista was forced to flee. He settled in the Dominican Republic first, then in Madeira, and finally in Guadalmina, close to Marbella, where he passed away. Without Batista as a leader, Cuba's new socialist regime would come to power, replacing the Constitution of 1940 on February 7th, with a fundamental law that would rule the country temporarily. Even though Castro had initially promised to reinstate the Constitution of 1940 and the call for elections, in 1976, an openly socialist constitution turned Cuba into a single-party state, dominated by the Communist Party of Cuba, definitely putting an end to the previous regime. But long before the Cubans thought that they were going to have a permanent domain by Fidel Castro, Venezuela had bought an airplane as part of the support to the Cuban Revolution, which was later used for the transportation of weapons that would serve to show complete support to the Cuban population and their fight for recovering their democracy. As a result of the purchase of this airplane, which was part of the logistics entrusted by Wolfgang Larrazábal, very detailed and revealing information was investigated and reported by historian Carlos Hernández González, who specialized in military topics. This was also based and sustained by documents kept by Captain Héctor Abdelnour and asserted by personalities of the Venezuelan civil aviation. C-46 of Avenza and Weapons for Fidel. In his autobiography, Captain of Civil Aviation, Luis Emiro Cañas, tells us that one morning in the beginning of November 1958, when he arrived at the company to take a flight to Miami, he saw a cargo plane, C-46, being towed inside the hangar. This was property of the Venezuelan commercial airline founded in 1943 by the Bolton family and some stock ownership of Pan American World Airways. For Cañas, what was supposed to be routine became innovative. When he returned from Miami that night, he saw that they were removing from the C-46 the distinctive Avenza features and labels and the rest of the small distinguishing marks, as trivial as they seemed. This caught the eye of the staff. When he went flying 2 days later, the C-46 was gone, and a friend who worked in maintenance told him that the plane had been taken by some pilots who didn't work for Avenza. When he saw the plane again, it was stationed in an isolated place and was being guarded by Marines. Cañas says that they knew the government used Curtis to send Fidel Castro a shipment of weapons. These weapons, which were very well preserved, had been discarded by the army in 1953 for being obsolete. This plane was transporting 5,000 kilos each trip and was landing in a secret runway on Sierra Maestra in Cuba, where it was received by rebel commander Crescencio Pérez. This armament contributed significantly to Fidel's final attack against Fulgencio Batista. It was also known that the president of the governing board of Venezuela, Wolfgang Larrazábal Hugueto, had sent Castro an FN rifle with plenty of ammunition as a personal gift. With this rifle on his back, Castro entered Havana triumphantly. Cañas' version confirms that the person in charge of this mission was a Marine, Sea Captain Héctor Abdelnour Musa, who was also an aide to President Larrazábal. Abdelnour Musa had suggested they use an Avenza plane in the mission because he had many friends in the company's pilot corps who he had befriended when he had flown to different Marine posts to Caracas. He was also friends with the Boltons, owners of Avenza. This company was founded in 1943 by the Bolton family, with some stock ownership by the American company Pan American World Airways. In his autobiography, Cañas added that he had the chance to meet Captain Abdelnour because of the proximity he maintained with the group that operated the DC-6. Captain Belugarte introduced them one morning when they had gone flying and he had been in Avenza. Years later, he found out by Captain Abdelnour himself that Cubans had been the ones to fly the plane with the weapons, and that he had been the one on the first flight assigned to bring the rifle as a gift to Fidel Castro from the president of Venezuela. This is according to the version by Captain Cañas. 3 flights were made in total, and when they were done, the aircraft was painted once again with Avenza's colors. In this same book, Captain Cañas pointed out that the Minister of Communications at the time, Mr. Oscar Machado Zuluaga, was the one who granted and signed the resolution of the initials for the Curtis airplane on December 16, 1958. By the same token, on October 2010, Captain Cañas consulted with Avenza's president, Mr. Henry Bolton, about the story of the purchase of the Curtis aircraft, and confirmed every detail written in his autobiography. In terms of the sale of the aircraft, Bolton made it clear during their conversation that he supposed it was a collaboration solicited by the government. Without any grounds to deny it, and as far as he remembered, it was necessary to remove the aircraft's emblems every time the Venezuelan authorities were made aware of the request, as well as the mission. A receipt was issued for the purchase of an aircraft from Avenza to Sea Captain Héctor Abdelnour Musa. It was for the acquisition of an aircraft with initials YVCEVC, Curtis Model C-46, serial number 264, for the amount of 284,380 bolivares. Although not a lot of people have knowledge of where the money to buy it came from, it was actually purchased with the money donated by the people through a campaign carried out in Venezuela at the time called One Bolivar for the Sierra. Many Venezuelans are participants of this part of their homeland's history. The aircraft stayed in Cuban territory, and as the story dictates, it was a secret mission, a mission of the state authorized by President Wolfgang Larrazábal, his cabinet and military high command, who were also responsible to participate in it. The transfer of weapons to Cuba, like we mentioned, was an undercover operation, as was the purchase of the aircraft, which was bought and paid for by the company Compañía Anónima Agropecuaria Motilón. And the transaction of such purchase was made by Sea Captain Héctor Abdelnour and the commanders, Second Lieutenant Juan Bautista Benavides, commander of Orchila, stopped the aircraft from taking off from Maigualida, headed to this Caribbean island, just for the purpose of not sharing the undisclosed support to the Cuban Revolution and its official issues. The aircraft had landed on the island, a Venezuelan naval base, loaded with weapons without Benavides's previous knowledge. When they tried to take off without waiting for orders, a rifle squad was placed in front of them with instructions to fire if the plane moved. The second lieutenant was new, but not naive, and he notified his superiors in Maigualida, and all hell broke loose when the news was informed. In those moments, they didn't know what to do because no encryption or code had been established to respond. He was heavily scolded, but later they recognized that the officer had acted properly when he saw a civilian aircraft with the emblem erased, completely loaded with weapons and with military uniforms. It wasn't nonsense. It would have been irresponsible if the second lieutenant had let it go and hadn't notified anybody. Inconveniences were resolved, and the aircraft took off and headed towards Sierra Maestra.